Chapter 29. Kundalini Śakta, Yoga. The word yoga comes from the root yuj, which means to join, and, in its spiritual sense, it is that process by which the human spirit is brought into near and conscious communion with, or is merged in. The divine spirit, according as the nature of the human spirit is held to be separate from Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, or one with Advaita, the divine spirit. As, according to Shakta doctrine, with which alone we are concerned, the latter proposition is affirmed, yoga is that process by which the identity of the two, Jivatma and Paramatma, Kama, which identity ever in fact exists, is realized by the yogi or practitioner of yoga. It is so realized because the spirit has then pierced through the veil of Maya, which as mind and matter obscures this knowledge from itself. The means by which this is achieved is the yoga process which liberates from Maya. So the Gheranda Samhita, a Hatha Yoga treatise of the Tantric school, says, Chapter 5, there is no bond equal in strength to Maya, and no power greater to destroy that bond than yoga. From an Advaita or monistic standpoint, yoga in the sense of a final union is inapplicable, for union implies a dualism of the divine and human spirit. In such a case, it denotes the process rather than the result. When the two are regarded as distinct, yoga may apply to both. A person who practices yoga is called a yogi. According to Indian notions, all are not competent, adhikari, to attempt yoga, only a very few are. One must, in this or in other lives, have first gone through karma or ritual, and upasana or devotional worship and obtained the fruit thereof, namely, a pure mind, siddhashuddhi. This Sanskrit term does not merely mean a mind free from sexual impurity, as an English reader might suppose. The attainment of this and other good qualities is the ABC of sadhana. A person may have a pure mind in this sense and yet be wholly incapable of yoga. Siddhashuddhi consists not merely in moral purity of every kind, but in knowledge, detachment, capacity for pure intellectual functioning, attention, meditation and so forth. When, by karma and upasana, the mind is brought to this point and when, in the case of Vedantic yoga, there is dispassion and detachment from the world and its desires, then the yoga path is open for the realization of tattvajnana. That is ultimate truth. Very few persons indeed are competent for yoga in its higher forms. The majority should seek their advancement along the path of ritual and devotion. There are four main forms of yoga, according to a common computation, namely, mantra yoga, hatha yoga, laya yoga, and raja yoga, the general characteristics of which have been described in the Serpent Power. It is only necessary here to note that Kundalini yoga is laya yoga. The 8th chapter of the Samahana Tantra, however, speaks of 5 kinds, namely, jnana, raja, laya, hatha, and mantra, and mentions as 5 aspects of the spiritual life, dharma, kriya, bhava, jnana, and yoga. Mantra yoga being said to be of 2 kinds, according as it is pursued along the path of kriya or bhava. Many forms of yoga are in fact mentioned in the books. There are 7 sadhanas of yoga, namely, satkarma, asana, mudra, pratyahara, pranayama, dhyana, and samadhi, which are cleansing of the body, seat, postures for gymnastic and yoga purposes, the abstraction of the senses from their objects. Breath control, the celebrated pranayama, meditation, and ecstasy, which is of 2 kinds, imperfect, savikalpa, in which dualism is no. Wholly overcome, and perfect, nirvikalpa, which is complete monistic experience, aham brahmasmi, I am the Brahman, a knowledge in the sense of realization which, it is to be observed, does not produce liberation, moksha, but is liberation itself. The samadhi of laya yoga is said to be savikalpa samadhi, and that of complete raja yoga is said to be nirvikalpa samadhi. The first 4 processes are physical and the last 3 mental and supramental, see Gheranda Samhita, Upadesha, I. By these 7 processes respectively certain qualities are gained, namely, purity, shodhana, firmness and strength, dridhata, fortitude, sthirata, steadiness, dharya, lightness, laghava, realization, pratyaksha, and detachment leading to liberation, nirliptattva. What is known as the eight-limbed yoga, Ashtanga yoga, contains 5 of the above sadhanas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dhyana, and samadhi, and 3 others, namely, yama or self-control by way of chastity, temperance, avoidance of harm, ahimsa, and their virtues, niyama or religious observances, charity and so forth, with devotion to the Lord, Ishvara pranadhana, and dharana, the fixing of the internal organ on its subject as directed in the yoga practice. For further details, I refer the reader to my introduction to the work entitled The Serpent Power. Here I will only deal shortly with Laya Yoga or the arousing of Kuṇḍalinī Śakti, a subject of the highest importance in the Tantra Śāstra, and without some knowledge of which much of its ritual will not be understood. I cannot enter into all the details which demand a lengthy exposition, and which I have given in the introduction to the 2 Sanskrit works called Satkakranarapana and Padukapankika translated in the volume. The serpent power which deals with Kuṇḍalinī Śakti and the piercing by her of the 6 bodily centers or chakras. The general principle and meaning of this yoga has never yet been published, and the present chapter is devoted to a short summary of these 2 points only. All the world, I speak, of course, of those interested in such subjects, is beginning to speak of Kuṇḍalinī Śakti, Set Fameuse Kundalini, as a French friend of mine calls her. There is considerable talk about the chakras and the serpent power but lack of understanding as to what they mean. This, as usual, is sought to be covered by an air of mystery, mystical mists, and sometimes the attitude, I should much like to tell you if only I were allowed to give it out. A silly Indian boast of which I lately read is, I have the key and I keep it. Those who really have the key to anything are superior men, above boasting. Mysticism, which is often confused thinking, is also a fertile soil of humbug. I do not, of course, speak of true mysticism. Like all other matters in this Indian Shastra, the basis of this yoga is essentially rational. Its thought, like that of the ancients generally, whether of East or West, has in general the form and brilliance of a cut gem. It is this quality which makes it so dear to some of those who have had to wade through the slush of much modern thought and literature. No attempt has hitherto been made to explain the general principles which underlie it. This form of yoga is an application of the general principles relating to Shakti with which I have already dealt. The subject has both a theoretical and a practical aspect. The latter is concerned with the teaching of the method in such a way that the aspirant may give effect to it. This cannot be learnt from books but only from the guru who has himself successfully practiced this yoga. Apart from difficulties, inherent in written explanations, it cannot be practically learnt from books, because the carrying out of the method is affected by the nature and capacity of the sadhaka and what takes place during his sadhana. Further, though some general features of the method have been explained to me, I have had no practical experience myself of this power. I am not speaking as a yogi in this method, which I am not, but as one who has read and studied the Shastra on this matter, and has had the further advantage of some oral explanations which have enabled me to better understand it. I have dealt with this practical side, so far as it is possible to me, in my work, The Serpent Power. Even so far as the matter can be dealt with in writing, I cannot, within the limits of such a paper as this, deal with it in any way fully. A detailed description of the chakras and their significance cannot be attempted here. I refer the reader to the work entitled The Serpent Power. What I wish to do is to treat the subject on the broadest lines possible and to explain the fundamental principles which underlie this yoga method. It is because these are not understood that there is much confused thinking and misty, if not mystical, talk upon the subject. How many persons, for instance, can correctly answer the question, what is Kuṇḍalinī Śakti? One may be told that it is a power or Shakti, that it is coiled like a serpent in the Muladhara, and that it is wakened and goes up through the chakras to the Sahasrara. But what Shakti is it? Why, again, is it coiled like a serpent? What is the meaning of this? What is the nature of the power? Why is it in the Muladhara? What is the meaning of awakening the power? Why if awakened should it go up? What are the chakras? It is easy to say that they are regions or lotuses. What are they in themselves? Why have each of the lotuses a different number of petals? What is a petal? What and why are the letters on them? What is the effect of going to the Sahasrara, and how does that effect come about? These and other similar questions require an answer before this form of yoga can be understood. I have said something as to the letters in the chapters on Shakti as mantra and Varṇamālā. With these and with other general questions, rather than with the details of the 6 chakras, set forth in the serpent power I will here deal. In the first place, it is necessary to remember the fundamental principle of the Tantra Śāstra to which I have already referred, viz., that man is a microcosm, Kshudrabrahmanda. Whatever exists in the outer universe exists in him. All the tattvas and the worlds are within him, and so are the supreme Shiva Shakti. The body may be divided into 2 main parts, namely, the head and trunk on one hand, and the legs on the other. In man, the center of the body is between these 2, at the base of the spine where the legs begin. Supporting the trunk and throughout the whole body there is the spinal cord. This is the axis of the body, just as Mount Meru is the axis of the earth. Hence man's spine is called Meridanda, the Meru or axis staff. The legs and feet are gross matter which show less signs of consciousness than the trunk with its spinal white and gray matter. Which trunk itself is greatly subordinate in this respect to the head containing the organ of mind, or physical brain, with its white and gray matter. The position of the white and gray matter in the head and spinal column respectively are reversed. The body and legs below the center are the 7 lower or nether worlds upheld by the sustaining Shaktis of the universe. From the center upwards, consciousness more freely manifests through the spinal and cerebral centers. Here there are the 7 upper regions or lokas, a term which Satyananda in his commentary on Isha Upanishad says, means, what are seen, lokayant, that is, experienced and are hence the fruits of karma in the form of particular rebirth. These regions, namely, Bhuva, Sva, Tapa, Jana, Maha, and Satya lokas correspond with the 6 centers, 5 in the trunk, the 6th in the lower cerebral center, and the 7th in the upper brain or Satyaloka, the abode of the supreme Shiva Shakti. The 6 centers are the Muladhara or root support situated at the base of the spinal column in a position midway in the perineum between the root of the genitals and the anus. Above it, in the region of the genitals, abdomen, heart, chest or throat and in the forehead between the 2 eyes, Brahmadai, are the Svadhisthana, Manipura, Anahata, Vishuddha and Ajna chakras or lotuses, Padma, respectively. These are the chief centers, though the books speak of others such as the Lalana and Manas and Soma chakras. In fact, in the Advaita Mrtunda, a modern Sanskrit book by the late guru of the Maharaja of Kashmir, some 50 chakras and adharas are mentioned, though the 6 stated are the chief upon which all accounts agree. And so it is said. How can there be any city for him who knows not the 6 chakras, the 16 adharas, the 5 ethers and the 3 lingas in his own body? The 7th region beyond the chakras is the upper brain, the highest center of manifestation of consciousness in the body and therefore the abode of the supreme Shiva Shakti. When abode is said, it is not meant, of course, that the supreme is there placed in the sense of our placing, namely, it is there and not elsewhere. The supreme is never localized whilst its manifestations are. It is everywhere both within and without the body, but it is said to be in the Sahasrara, because it is there that the supreme Shiva Shakti is realized. And this must be so, because consciousness is realized by entering in and passing through the highest manifestation of mind, the Sattvamay Buddhi, above and beyond which is Cit and Sidrapini Shakti themselves. From their Shiva Shakti Tattva aspect are evolved mind in its form as Buddhi, Ahamkara, Manas and associated senses, Indriyas, the center of which is in and above the Ajna Chakra and below the Sahasrara. From Ahamkara proceed the Tanmatras or generals of the sense particulars which evolve the 5 forms of sensible matter, Buddha, namely, Akasha, ether, Vayu, air, Agni, fire, Apis, water, and Prithvi, earth. The English translations given of these terms do not imply that the Buddhas are the same as the English elements of air, fire, water, earth. The terms indicate varying degrees of matter from the ethereal to the solid. Thus Prithvi or earth is any matter in the Prithvi state, that is, which may be sensed by the Indriya of smell. Mind and matter pervade the whole body. But there are centers therein in which they are predominant. Thus Ajna is a center of mind, and the 5 lower chakras are centers of the 5 Buddhas, Vishuddha of Akasha, Anahata of Vayu, Manipura of Agni, Svadhisthana of Apis, and Muladhara of Prithvi. In short, man as a microcosm is the all-pervading spirit, which most purely manifests in the Sahasrara, vehicled by Shakti in the form of mind and matter, the centers of which are the 6th and following 5 chakras respectively. The 6 chakras have been identified with the following plexuses commencing from the lowest, the Muladhara, the sacrococcygeal plexus, the sacral plexus. The solar plexus, which forms the great junction of the right and left sympathetic chains Ida and Pingala with the cerebrospinal axis. Connected with this is the lumbar plexus. Then follows the cardiac plexus, Anahata, laryngeal plexus, and lastly the ajna or cerebellum with its 2 lobes, and above this the manas chakra or sensorium with its 6 lobes, the soma chakra or middle cerebrum. And lastly the sahasrara or upper cerebrum. To some extent these localizations are yet tentative. This statement may involve an erroneous view of what the chakras really are, and is likely to produce wrong notions concerning them in others. The 6 chakras themselves are vital centers within the spinal column in the white and gray matter there. They may, however, and probably do, influence and govern the gross tract outside the spine in the bodily region lateral to, and coextensive with, the section of the spinal column in which a particular center is situated. The chakras are centers of Shakti as vital force. In other words, they are centers of Pranashakti manifested by Pranavayu in the living body, the presiding devatas of which are names for the universal consciousness as it manifests in the form of those centers. The chakras are not perceptible to the gross senses, whatever may be a yogi's powers to observe what is beyond the senses, adindriya. Even if they were perceptible in the living body which they help to organize, they disappear with the disintegration of organism at death. In an article on the physical errors of Hinduism, Calcutta Review, 11, 436-440, it was said, it would indeed excite the surprise of our readers to hear that the Hindus, who would not even touch a dead body, much less dissect it, which is incorrect, should possess any anatomical knowledge at all. It is the Tantras that furnish us with some extraordinary pieces of information concerning the human body, but of all the Hindus' Shastras extant, the Tantras lie in the greatest obscurity. The Tantric theory, on which the well-known yoga called Shakta is founded, supposes the existence of 6 main internal organs, called chakras or padmas, all bearing a special resemblance to that famous flower, the lotus. These are placed one above the other, and connected by 3 imaginary chains, the emblems of the Ganges, the Yamuna, and the Sarasvati. Such is the obstinacy with which the Hindus adhere to these erroneous notions, that, even when we show them by actual dissection the non-existence of the imaginary chakras in the human body, they will rather have recourse to excuses revolting to common sense than acknowledge the evidence of their own eyes. They say, with a shamelessness unparalleled, that these padmas exist as long as a man lives, but disappear the moment he dies. This alleged shamelessness reminds me of the story of a doctor who told my father that he had performed many postmortems and had never yet discovered a soul. The petals of the lotuses vary, being 4, 6, 10, 12, 16 and 2 respectively, commencing from the Muladhara and ending with Ajna. There are 50 in all, as are the letters of the alphabet which are in the petals. That is, the matrikas are associated with the tattvas since both are products of the same creative cosmic process manifesting either as physiological or psychological function. It is noteworthy that the number of the petals is that of the letters leaving out either ksha or the second la, and that these 50 multiplied by 20 are in the 1000 petals of the Sahasrara. A number which is probably only indicative of multitude and magnitude. But why, it may be asked, do the petals vary in number? Why, for instance, are there 4 in the Muladhara and 6 in the Svadhisthana? The answer given is that the number of petals in any chakra is determined by the number and position of the nadis or yoga nerves around that chakra. Thus, for nadis surrounding and passing through the vital movements of the Muladhara Chakra give it the appearance of a lotus of 4 petals. The petals are thus configurations made by the position of nadis at any particular center. These nadis are not those which are known to the Vaidya of medical Shastras. The latter are gross physical nerves. The former here spoken of are called yoga nadis and are subtle channels, vivara, along which the pranic currents flow. The term nadi comes from the root nad, which means motion. The body is filled with an uncountable number of nadis. If they were revealed to the eye, the body would present the appearance of a highly complicated chart of ocean currents. Superficially, the water seems one and the same. But examination shows that it is moving with varying degrees of force in all directions. All these lotuses exist in the spinal column. An Indian physician and Sanskritist has, in the Guy's Hospital Gazette, expressed the opinion that better anatomy is given in the Tantras than in the purely medical works of the Hindus. I have attempted elsewhere to correlate present and ancient anatomy and physiology. I can, however, only mention here some salient points, first pointing out that the Shivasvarodhya Shastra gives prominence to nerve centers and nerve currents, vayu, and their control. Such teaching being for the purpose of worship, upasana, and yoga. The aims and object of the 2 Shastras are not the same. The Meridanda is the vertebral column. Western anatomy divides it into 5 regions. And it is to be noted in corroboration of the theory here exposed that these correspond with the regions in which the 5 chakras are situate. The central spinal system comprises the brain or encephalon contained within the skull, in which are the Lalana, Ajna, Manas, Soma chakras, and the Sahasrara. As also the spinal cord extending from the upper border of the atlas below the cerebellum and descending to the 2nd lumbar vertebra where it tapers to a point called the filum terminale. Within the spine is the cord, a compound of gray and white brain matter, in which are the 5 lower chakras. It is noteworthy that the filum terminale was formerly thought to be a mere fibrous cord, an unsuitable vehicle, one might think, for the Muladhara Chakra and Kuṇḍalinī Śakti. Recent microscopic investigations have, however, disclosed the existence of highly sensitive gray matter in the filum terminale which represents the position of the Muladhara. According to Western science, the spinal cord is not merely a conductor between the periphery and the centers of sensation and volition, but is also an independent center or group of centers. The Sushumna is a nadi in the center of the spinal column. Its base is called the Brahmadvara or gate of Brahman. As regards the physiological relations of the chakras, all that can be said with any degree of certainty is that the 4 above the Muladhara have relation to the genito-excretory, digestive, cardiac and respiratory functions. And that the 2 upper centers, the Ajna, with associated chakras, and the Sahasrara denote various forms of its cerebral activity ending in the response of pure consciousness therein gained through yoga. The nadis on each side called Ida and Pingala are the left and right sympathetic cords crossing the central column from one side to the other, making it the Ajna with the Sushumna a threefold knot called Triveni. Which is the spot in the medulla where the sympathetic cords join together and whence they take their origin, these nadis together with the 2-lobed Ajna and the Sushumna forming the figure of the caduceus of the god Mercury which is said by some to represent them. How then does this yoga compare with others? It will now be asked what are the general principles which underlie the yoga practice above described. How is it that the rousing of Kundalini Śakti and her union with Shiva effect the state of ecstatic union, samadhi, and spiritual experience which is alleged? The reader who has understood the general principles recorded in the previous essays should, if he has not already divined it, readily appreciate the answer here given. In the first place, there are 2 main lines of yoga, namely, Dhyana or Bhavana Yoga and Kundalini Yoga, the subject of this work, and there is a marked difference between the 2. The first class of yoga is that in which ecstasy, samadhi, is attained by intellective processes, kriya-jnana, of meditation and the like, with the aid, it may be, of auxiliary processes of mantra or hatha yoga, other than the rousing of Kundalini Śakti, and by detachment from the world. The second stands apart as that portion of Hatha Yoga in which, though intellective processes are not neglected, the creative and sustaining Shakti of the whole body is actually and truly united with the Lord consciousness. The yogi makes her introduce him to her Lord, and enjoys the bliss of union through her. Though it is he who arouses her, it is she who gives jnana, for she is herself that. The Dhyanayogi gains what acquaintance with the supreme state his own meditative powers can given him and knows not the enjoyment of union with Shiva in and through his fundamental body power. The two forms of yoga differ both as to method and result. The Hatha Yoga regards his yoga and its fruit as the highest. The Jnana Yogi may think similarly of his own. Kundalini is so renowned that many seek to know her. Having studied the theory of this yoga, I have been often asked, whether one can get on without it. The answer is, it depends upon what you are looking for. If you want to rouse Kundalini Śakti to enjoy the bliss of union of Shiva and Shakti through her and to gain the accompanying powers, siddhi, it is obvious that this end can only, if at all, be achieved by the yoga here described. But if liberation is sought without desire for union through Kundalini, then such yoga is not necessary. For liberation may be obtained by pure Jnana Yoga through detachment, the exercise, and then the stilling of the mind, without any reference to the central body power at all. Instead of setting out in and from the world to unite with Shiva, the Jnana Yogi, to attain this result, detaches himself from the world. The one is the path of enjoyment and the other of asceticism. Samadhi may also be obtained on the path of devotion, bhakti, as on that of knowledge. Indeed, the highest devotion, parabhakti, is not different from knowledge. Both are realization. But, whilst liberation, mukti, is attainable by either method, there are other marked differences between the two. A Dhyanayogi should not neglect his body, knowing that as he is both mind and matter, each reacts, the one upon the other. Neglect or mere mortification of the body is more apt to produce disordered imagination than a true spiritual experience. He is not concerned, however, with the body in the sense that the Hathayogi is. It is possible to be a successful Dhyanayogi and yet to be weak in body and health, sick, and short-lived. His body and not he himself determines when he shall die. He cannot die at will. When he is in Samadhi, Kuṇḍalinī Śakti is still sleeping in the Muladhara, and none of the physical symptoms and psychical bliss, or powers, siddhi, described as accompanying her rousing are observed in his case. The ecstasis which he calls liberation while yet living, jivanmukti, is not a state like that of real liberation. He may be still subject to a suffering body from which he escapes only at death, when, if at all, he is liberated. His ecstasy is in the nature of a meditation which passes into the void, bhavana samadhi, effected through negation of all thought form, cittavritti, and detachment from the world. A comparatively negative process in which the positive act of raising the central power of the body takes no part. By his effort the mind, which is a product of Kundalini as Prakriti Shakti, together with its worldly desires, is stilled so that the veil produced by mental functioning is removed from consciousness. In Laya Yoga, Kundalini herself, when roused by the yogi, for such rousing is his act and part, achieves for him this illumination. But why, it may be asked, should one trouble over the body and its central power, the more particularly as there are unusual risks and difficulties involved? The answer has been already given: alleged completeness and certainty of realization through the agency of the power which is knowledge itself, Jnanarupa Shakti, an intermediate acquisition or powers, siddhi. An intermediate and final enjoyment. This answer may, however, be usefully developed as a fundamental principle of the Śākta Tantra. The Śākta Tantra claims to give both enjoyment, bhakti, in the world and liberation, mukti, from all worlds. This claim is based on a profoundly true principle, given Advaitavada as a basis. If the ultimate reality is the one which exists in two aspects of quiescent enjoyment of the self, in liberation from all form and active enjoyment of objects, that is, as pure spirit and spirit in matter, then a complete union with reality demands such unity in both of its aspects. It must be known both, here, aiche, and there, amutra. When rightly apprehended and practiced, there is truth in the doctrine which teaches that man should make the best of both worlds. There is no real incompatibility between the two, provided action is taken in conformity with the universal law of manifestation. It is held to be false teaching that happiness hereafter can only be had by absence of enjoyment now, or in deliberately sought for suffering and mortification. It is the one Shiva who is the supreme blissful experience and who appears in the form of man with a life of mingled pleasure and pain. Both happiness here and the bliss of liberation here and hereafter may be attained, if the identity of these Shivas be realized in every human act. This will be achieved by making every human function, without exception, a religious act of sacrifice and worship, yajna. In the ancient Vedic ritual, enjoyment by way of food and drink, was preceded and accompanied by ceremonial sacrifice and ritual. Such enjoyment was the fruit of the sacrifice and the gift of the devas. At a higher stage in the life of a sadhaka, it is offered to the one from whom all gifts come and of whom the devatas are inferior limited forms. But this offering also involves a dualism from which the highest monistic, Advaita, sadhana of the Śākta Tantra is free. Here the individual life and the world life are known as one. And so the tantric sadhaka, when eating or drinking or fulfilling any other of the natural functions of the body does so, saying and believing, Shivoham, I am Shiva, Bhairavoham, I am Bhairava, Saham, I am Shi. It is not merely the separate individual who thus acts and enjoys. It is Shiva who does so in and through him. Such an one recognizes, as has been well said, that his life and the play of all its activities are not a thing apart, to be held and pursued egotistically for its and his own separate sake. As though enjoyment was something to be filched from life by his own unaided strength and with a sense of separatedness. But his life and all its activities are conceived as part of the divine action in nature, Shakti manifesting and operating in the form of man. He realizes in the pulsing beat of his heart the rhythm which throbs through and is the sign of the universal life. To neglect or to deny the needs of the body, to think of it as something not divine, is to neglect and deny the greater life of which it is a part. And to falsify the great doctrine of the unity of all and of the ultimate identity of matter and spirit. Governed by such a concept, even the lowliest physical needs take on a cosmic significance. The body is Shakti. Its needs are Sakti's needs. When man enjoys, it is Shakti who enjoys through him. In all he sees and does, it is the mother who looks and acts. His eyes and hands are hers. The whole body and all its functions are her manifestation. To fully realize her as such is to perfect this particular manifestation of hers which is himself. Man when seeking to be the master of himself, seeks so on all the planes to be physical, mental and spiritual. Nor can they be severed, for they are all related, being but differing aspects of the one all-pervading consciousness. Who is the more divine? He who neglects and spurns the body or mind that he may attain some fancied spiritual superiority, or he who rightly cherishes both as forms of the one spirit which they clothe. Realization is more speedily and truly attained by discerning spirit in and as all being and its activities, than by fleeing from and casting these aside as being either unspiritual or illusory and impediments in the path. If not rightly conceived, they map be impediments and the cause of fall, otherwise they become instruments of attainment, and what others are there to hand. And so the Kuṇḍalinī Tantra says, by what men fall by that they rise. When acts are done in the right feeling and frame of mind, bhava, those acts give enjoyment, bhakti, and the repeated and prolonged bhava produces at length that divine experience, tattvajnana, which is liberation. When the mother is seen in all things, she is at length realized as she who is beyond them all. These general principles have their more frequent application in the life of the world before entrance on the path of yoga proper. The yoga here described is, however, also an application of these same principles, in so far as it is claimed that thereby both bhakti and mukti are attained. Ordinarily, it is said, that where there is yoga there is no bhoga, enjoyment. But in Kaula teaching, yoga is bhoga, and bhoga is yoga, and the world itself becomes the seat of liberation, yogo bhogayate, mokshayate samsara. By the lower processes of Hatha Yoga it is sought to attain a perfect physical body which will also be a wholly fit instrument by which the mind may function. A perfect mind, again, approaches, and in samadhi passes into, pure consciousness itself. The Hatha Yogi thus seeks a body which shall be as strong as steel, healthy, free from suffering and therefore long-lived. Master of the body he is, master of both life and death. His lustrous form enjoys the vitality of youth. He lives as long as he has the will to live and enjoy in the world of forms. His death is the death at will, icham mrityu, when making the great and wonderfully expressive gesture of dissolution, samhara mudra, he grandly departs. But it may be said, the Hatha Yogis do get sick and die. In the first place, the full discipline is one of difficulty and risk, and can only be pursued under the guidance of a skilled guru. As the Garaksha Samhita says, unaided and unsuccessful practice may lead not only to disease but death. He who seeks to conquer the Lord of Death incurs the risk, on failure, of a more speedy conquest by him. All who attempt this yoga do not of course succeed or meet with the same measure of success. Those who fail not only incur the infirmities of ordinary men, but also others brought on by practices which have been ill pursued or for which they are not fit. Those again who do succeed, do so in varying degrees. One may prolong his life to the sacred age of 84, others to 100, others yet further. In theory at least those who are perfected, siddha, go from this plane when they will. All have not the same capacity or opportunity, through want of will, bodily strength, or circumstance. All may not be willing or able to follow the strict rules necessary for success. Nor does modern life offer in general the opportunities for so complete a physical culture. All men may not desire such a life or may think the attainment of it not worth the trouble involved. Some may wish to be rid of their body and that as speedily as possible. It is therefore said that it is easier to gain liberation than deathlessness. The former may be had by unselfishness, detachment from the world, moral and mental discipline. But to conquer death is harder than this, for these qualities and acts will not alone avail. He who does so conquer holds life in the hollow of one hand, and if he be a successful, siddha, yogi, liberation in the other. He has enjoyment and liberation. He is the emperor who is master of the world and the possessor of the bliss which is beyond all worlds. Therefore it is claimed by the Hatha Yogi that every sadhana is inferior to Hatha Yoga. The Hatha Yoga who works for liberation does so through the Yoga Sadhana here described which gives both enjoyment and liberation. At every center to which he rouses Kundalini he experiences a special form of bliss, ananda, and gains special powers, siddhi. Carrying her to the Shiva of his cerebral center he enjoys supreme bliss which in its nature is liberation, and which when established in permanence is liberation itself on the loosening of spirit and body. She who shines like a chain of lights, a lightning flash in the center of his body is the inner woman to whom reference was made when it was said, "What need have I of any outer woman? I have an inner woman within myself." The Vira, heroic, Sadaka, knowing himself as the embodiment of Shiva, Shivoham, unites with woman as the embodiment of Shakti on the physical plane. The Divya, divine, Sadaka or yogi unites within himself his own principles, female and male, which are the heart of the Lord, Hridayam Paramshatu, or Shakti and her Lord consciousness or Shiva. It is their union which is the mystic coition, Maithuna, of the Tantras. There are two forms of union, Samarajya, namely, the first which is the gross, Stula, or the union of the physical embodiments of the Supreme Consciousness. And the second which is the subtle, Sukshma, or the union of the quiescent and active principles in consciousness itself. It is the latter which is liberation. Lastly, what, in a philosophical sense, is the nature of the process here described? Shortly stated, energy, Shakti, polarizes itself into two forms. Namely, static or potential, Kundalini, and dynamic, the working forces of the body as prana. Behind all activity there is a static background. This static center in the human body is the central serpent power in the Muladhara, root support. It is the power which is the static support, adhara, of the whole body and all its moving pranic forces. This center, kendra, of power is a gross form of CIT or consciousness, that is, in itself, svarupa, it is consciousness, and by appearance it is a power which, as the highest form of force, is a manifestation of it. Just as there is a distinction, though identical at base, between the supreme quiescent consciousness and its active power, Shakti, so when consciousness manifests as energy, Shakti, it possesses the twin aspects of potential and kinetic energy. There can be no partition in fact of reality. To the perfect eye of the Siddha the process of becoming is an ascription, adhyasa. To the imperfect eye of the Sadhaka, that is, the aspirant for siddhi, perfected accomplishment, to the spirit which is still toiling through the lower planes and variously identifying itself with them. Becoming is tending to appear and appearance is real. The Śākta Tantra is a rendering of Vedantic truth from this practical point of view, and represents the world process as a polarization in consciousness itself. This polarity as it exists in, and as, the body is destroyed by yoga which disturbs the equilibrium of bodily consciousness, which consciousness is the result of the maintenance of these two poles. In the human body the potential pole of energy which is the supreme power is stirred to action, on which the moving forces, dynamic Shakti, supported by it are drawn thereto. And the whole dynamism thus engendered moves upward to unite with the quiescent consciousness in the highest lotus. There is a polarization of Shakti into two forms, static and dynamic. In a correspondence I had with Professor Prumtha Nathamukhopadhyaya, on this subject, he very well developed this point and brought forward some suitable illustrations of it, which I am glad to avail myself of. He pointed out that, in the first place, in the mind or experience this polarization or polarity is patent to reflection, namely, the polarity between pure CIT and the stress which is involved in it. This stress or Shakti develops the mind through an infinity of forms and changes, themselves involved in the pure unbounded ether of consciousness, the Siddhakasha. This analysis exhibits the primordial Shakti in the same two polar forms as before, static and dynamic. Here the polarity is most fundamental and approaches absoluteness, though of course, it is to be remembered that there is no absolute rest except in pure CIT. Cosmic energy is in an equilibrium which is relative and not absolute. Passing from mind, let us take matter. The atom of modern science has, as I have already pointed out, ceased to be an atom in the sense of an indivisible unit of matter. According to the electron theory, the so-called atom is a miniature universe resembling our solar system. At the center of this atomic system we have a charge of positive electricity round which a cloud of negative charges called electrons revolve. The positive and negative charges hold each other in check so that the atom is in a condition of equilibrated energy and does not ordinarily break up, though it may do so on the dissociation which is the characteristic of all matter, but which is so clearly manifest in radioactivity of radium. We have thus here again a positive charge at rest at the center, and negative charges in motion round about the center. What is thus said about the atom applies to the whole cosmic system and universe. In the world system, the planets revolve round the sun, and that system itself is probably, taken as a whole, a moving mass around some other relatively static center, until we arrive at the Brahmabindu which is the point of absolute rest, round which all forms revolve and by which all are maintained. He has aptly suggested other illustrations of the same process. Thus, in the tissues of the living body, the operative energy is polarized into two forms of energy, anabolic and catabolic, the one tending to change and the other to conserve the tissues. The actual condition of the tissues being simply the resultant of these two coexistent or concurrent activities. In the case, again, of the impregnated ovum, Shakti is already presented in its two polar aspects, namely, the ovum, possibly the static, and the spermatozoon, the dynamic. The germ cell does not cease to be such. It splits into two, one half, the somatic cell gradually developing itself into the body of the animal. The other half remaining encased within the body practically unchanged and as the germ plasma is transmitted in the process of reproduction to the offspring. In short, Shakti, when manifesting, divides itself into two polar aspects, static and dynamic, which implies that you cannot have it in a dynamic form without at the same time having it in a static form, much like the poles of a magnet. In any given sphere of activity of force, we must have, according to the cosmic principle, a static background, Shakti, at rest or coiled, as the Tantras say. This scientific truth is illustrated in the figure of the Tantric Kali. The Divine Mother moves as the kinetic Shakti on the breast of Sadashiva, who is the static background of pure Cit, which is actionless, Nishkriya, the Gunamaya Mother being all activity. The cosmic Shakti is the collectivity, Samashti, in relation to which the Kundali in particular bodies is the Vyasti, individual, Shakti. The body is, as I have stated, a microcosm, Kshudrabrahmanda. In the living body there is, therefore, the same polarization of which I have spoken. From the Mahakundali the universe has sprung. In her supreme form she is at rest, coiled round and one, as Sidrapini, with the Shivabindu. She is then at rest. She next uncoils herself to manifest. Here the three coils of which the Tantras speak are the three gunas, and the 3.5 coils to which the Kubjika Tantra alludes are Prakriti and its three gunas together with the Vikritis. Her 50 coils are the letters of the alphabet. As she goes on uncoiling, the Tattvas and the Matrikas, the mothers of the Varnas, issue from her. She is thus moving, and continues even after creation to move in the Tattvas so created. For as they are born of movement, they continue to move. The whole world, Jagat, as the Sanskrit term implies, is moving. She thus continues creatively active until she has evolved Prithvi, the last of the Tattvas. First she creates mind and then matter. This latter becomes more and more dense. It has been suggested that the Mahabuddhas are the densities of modern science, air density associated with the maximum velocity of gravity, fire density associated with the velocity of light, water or fluid density associated with molecular velocity and the equatorial velocity of the Earth's rotation, and earth density, that of basalt associated with the Newtonian velocity of sound. However this be, it is plain that the Buddhas represent an increasing density of matter until it reaches its three-dimensional solid form. When Shakti has created this last or Prithvi Tattva, what is there further for her to do? Nothing. She, therefore, then again rests. She is again coiled, which means that she is at rest. At rest, again, means that she assumes a static form. Shakti, however, is never exhausted, that is, emptied into any of its forms. Therefore, Kuṇḍalini Śakti at this point is, as it were, the Shakti left over, though yet a plenum, after the Prithvi, the last of the Buddhas has been created. We have thus Mahakundali at rest as Sidrapini Shakti in the Sahasrara, the point of absolute rest, and then the body in which the relative static center is Kundali at rest, and round this center the whole of the bodily forces move. They are Shakti, and so is Kuṇḍalini Śakti. The difference between the two is that they are Shakti in specific differentiated forms in movement, and Kuṇḍalini Śakti is undifferentiated, residual Shakti at rest, that is, coiled. She is coiled in the Muladhara, which means fundamental support, and which is at the same time the seat of the Prithvi or last solid Tattva and of the residual Shakti or Kundalini. The body may, therefore, be compared to a magnet with two poles. The Muladhara, in so far as it is the seat of Kuṇḍalini Śakti, a comparatively gross form of Cit, being Cit Shakti and Maya Shakti, is the static pole in relation to the rest of the body which is dynamic. The working, that is the body necessarily presupposes and finds such a static support, hence the name Muladhara. In one sense the static Shakti at the Muladhara is necessarily coexistent with the creating and evolving Shakti of the body. Because the dynamic aspect or pole can never be without its static counterpart. In another sense, it is the residual Shakti left over after such operation. What, then, happens in the accomplishment of this yoga? This static Shakti is affected by pranayama and other yogic processes and becomes dynamic. Thus, when completely dynamic, that is, when Kundali unites with Shiva in the Sahasrara, the polarization of the body gives way. The two poles are united in one, and there is the state of consciousness called samadhi. The polarization, of course, takes place in consciousness. The body actually continues to exist as an object of observation to others. It continues its organic life. But man's consciousness of his body and all other objects is withdrawn because the mind has ceased, so far as his consciousness is concerned, the function, having been withdrawn into its ground, which is consciousness. How is the body sustained? In the first place, though Kuṇḍalinī Śakti is the static center of the whole body as a complete conscious organism, yet each of the parts of the body and their constituent cells have their own static centers which uphold such parts or cells. Next, the theory of the Tantrics themselves is that Kuṇḍalinī ascends, and that the body, as a complete organism, is maintained by the nectar which flows from the union of Shiva and Shakti in the Sahasrara. This nectar is an ejection of power generated by their union. My friend, however, whom I have cited, is of opinion, and for this grounds may be urged, that the potential Kuṇḍalinī Śakti becomes only partly and not wholly converted into kinetic Shakti. And yet since Shakti, even as given in the Mūla center, is an infinitude, it is not depleted, the potential store always remaining unexhausted. In this case, the dynamic equivalent is a partial conversion of one mode of energy into another. If, however, the coiled power at the Mūla became absolutely uncoiled, there would result the dissolution of the three bodies, gross, subtle and causal. And consequently Videhamukti, because the static background in relation to a particular form of existence would, according to this hypothesis, have wholly given way. He would explain the fact that the body becomes cold as a corpse as the Shakti leaves it, as being due, not to the depletion or privation of the static power at the Muladhara, but to the concentration or convergence of the dynamic power ordinarily diffused over the whole body. So that the dynamic equivalent which is set up against the static background of Kuṇḍalinī Śakti is only the diffused fivefold prana gathered home, withdrawn from the other tissues of the body and concentrated along the axis. Thus, ordinarily, the dynamic equivalent is the prana diffused over all the tissues. In yoga, it is converged along the axis, the static equivalent of Kuṇḍalinī Śakti enduring in both cases. Some part of the already available dynamic prana is made to act at the base of the axis in a suitable manner, by which means the basal center or Muladhara becomes, as it were, oversaturated and reacts on the whole diffused dynamic power, or prana, of the body by withdrawing it from the tissues and converging it along the line of the axis. In this way the diffused dynamic equivalent becomes the converged dynamic equivalent along the axis. What, according to this view, ascends, is not the whole Shakti but an eject like condensed lightning, which at length reaches the Paramashivasthana. There, the central power which upholds the individual world consciousness is merged in the supreme consciousness. The limited consciousness, transcending the passing concepts of worldly life, directly intuits the unchanging reality which underlies the whole phenomenal flow. When Kuṇḍalinī Śakti sleeps in the Muladhara, man is awake to the world. When she awakes to unite, and does unite, with the supreme static consciousness which is Shiva, then consciousness is asleep to the world and is one with the light of all things. Putting aside detail, the main principle appears to be that, when wakened, Kuṇḍalinī Śakti either herself, or as my friend suggests in her eject, ceases to be a static power which sustains the world consciousness, the content of which is held only so long as she sleeps, and when once set in movement is drawn to that other static center in the thousand-petaled lotus, Sahasrara, which is herself in union with the Shiva consciousness or the consciousness of ecstasy beyond the world of forms. When Kuṇḍalinī sleeps, man is awake to this world. When she awakes, he sleeps, that is, loses all consciousness of the world and enters his causal body. In yoga he passes beyond to formless consciousness. I have only to add, without further discussion of the point, that practitioners of this yoga claim that it is higher than any other and that the samadhi, ecstasy, attained thereby is more perfect. The reason which they allege is this. In dhyana yoga, ecstasy takes place through detachment from the world, and mental concentration leading to vacuity of mental operation, vritti, or the uprising of pure consciousness unhindered by the limitations of the mind. The degree to which this unveiling of consciousness is effected depends upon the meditative powers, jnana shakti, of the sadhaka and the extent of his detachment from the world. On the other hand, Kundalini, who is all Shakti and who is therefore jnana shakti herself, produces, when awakened by the yogi, full jnana for him. Secondly, in the samadhi of dhyana yoga there is no rousing union of Kundalini Shakti with the accompanying bliss and acquisition of special powers, siddhi. Further, in Kundalini Yoga there is not merely a samadhi through meditation, but through the central power of the jiva, a power which carries with it the forces of both body and mind. The union in that sense is claimed to be more complete than that enacted through mental methods only. Though in both cases bodily consciousness is lost, in Kundalini Yoga not only the mind, but the body, in so far as it is represented by its central power, or may be its eject, is actually united with Shiva. This union produces an enjoyment, bhakti, which the dhyanayogi does not possess. Whilst both the divya yogi and the vira sadhaka have enjoyment, bhakti, that of the former is said to be infinitely more intense, being an experience of bliss itself. The enjoyment of the vira sadhaka is but a reflection of it on the physical plane, a welling up of the true bliss through the deadening coverings and trammels of matter. Again, whilst it is said that both have liberation, mukti, this word is used in vira sadhana in a figurative sense only, indicating a bliss which is the nearest approach on the physical plane to that of mukti. An above awe or feeling of momentary union of Shiva and Shakti which ripens in the higher yoga sadhana into the literal liberation of the yogi. He has both enjoyment, bhakti, and liberation, mukti, in the fullest and literal sense. Hence its claim to be the emperor of all yogas. However this may be, I leave the subject at this point, with the hope that others will continue the esquire I have here initiated. It and other matters in the Tantra Śāstra seem to me, whatever be their inherent value, worthy of an investigation which they have not yet received. Chapter 30. Conclusions. Brahmanism or Hinduism, as in its later development the former has been called, is not merely a religion. It is a socio-economic system, the foundation of which is the law of caste and stages of life. That system has its culture, of which several forms of religion, resting on a certain common basis, are but a part. Dealing, however, with Brahmanism in its religious aspect, we may say that it, together with Jainism and Buddhism, are the three chief religions of India, as opposed to those of the Semitic origin. All three religious systems share in common certain fundamental concepts which are denoted by the Sanskrit terms karma, samsara and moksha. These concepts constitute a common denominator of Indian belief as next stated. The universe is in constant activity. Nothing which is psychophysical is at rest. Karma is action. The psychophysical as such is determined by karma or action, and, therefore, man's present condition is determined by past karma, either his own, or that of collectivities of men of which he is a member, or with which he is in relation. As also by the action of natural causes. In the same way, present karma determines the future karma. The doctrine of karma is thus the affirmance of the law of causality operating not only in this but in an infinity of universes. As you sow, so shall you reap. The present universe is not the first and last only. It is true that this particular universe has a beginning and an end called dissolution, for nothing composite is eternal, but it is only one of a series which has neither beginning nor end. There has been, is now, and ever will be in universe. Mental action as desire for worldly enjoyment, even though such enjoyment be lawful, keeps man in the worlds of repeated birth and death, or, to use the English term, of reincarnation. These worlds the Greeks called the cycle of becoming, and Hindus the samsara, a term which literally means the unending moving on or wandering, that is, being born and dying repeatedly. These worlds comprise not only earth but heaven and hell, in which are reaped the fruits of man's actions on earth. Heaven and hell are states of enjoyment and suffering which exist here on earth as well as in the after-death state as the result of man's good and bad actions returning. When man dies there is no resurrection of the gross body. That is resolved into its subtle elements, and the specific relation between man and a particular gross body comes to an end. But there is always some body until bodiless liberation is achieved. On death man in his subtle body enjoys the state called heaven or suffers in that called hell. Neither is eternal, but each a part of the cycle of the becoming. When, then, man has had heavenly enjoyment or suffered the pains of hell in his subtle body, in the after-death state, according to his merits or demerits, he is reincarnated in a gross body on earth. He continues thus to be reincarnated until he has found and desires the way out from the cycle, that is, until he ceases to desire world existence. His desire is then not only for release from the sufferings and limited happiness of the cycle but also, according to Vedanta, for the attainment of the supreme worth which is supreme bliss. There is, in short, a change of values and states. Man, as Nietzsche said, is something to be transcended. He cannot transcend his present state so long as he is attached to and desires to remain in it. This liberation from the cycle is called moksha or mukti. For all three systems are at one in holding that, notwithstanding the law of causality, man is free to liberate himself from the cycle. Causality governs the psychophysical. Spirit as such is freedom from the psychophysical. All three systems assume a state of liberation. Whether the universe as a play of force is the work of a personal God is a question which philosophers have disputed both in the East and the West. One set of Buddhists professed belief in deity as the Lord. Another affirms svabhava, which means the proper vigor of nature, and what is called creation is truly spontaneity resulting from powers inherent in the psychophysical substance eternally. Mayaveda Vedanta reconciles to a great extent these two views by its doctrine that the personal Brahman or the Lord is the selfless absolute Brahman as conceived by the psychophysical experiencer. Though the latter as the absolute exclusive of all relations is not the former. In Śākta doctrine Brahman is the Lord or creator and director of the universe, but in its own nature is more than that. Whether there is or is not a personal God or Lord, as held by some systems, belief in such a Lord is no essential portion of the common doctrine. Both Jainism and Buddhism are atheistic in the sense of being lordless, though the latter system, in some forms of the later northern schools, takes on a theistic color. In fact, the notion of a personal God is no essential part even of Brahmanism itself. For putting aside downright atheists in the Western sense, such as the Indian Karvakas and Lokayatas who denied God, soul, immortality and future life, it is to be observed that some schools posit no such Lord whilst others do. Two other concepts of first-rate importance are dharma and its correlative adharma. These two terms, in the Brahmanic sense, mean right activity and its opposite. They are therefore connected with karma, of which they are two species. The term dharma comes from the root dry, which means to uphold and maintain, for right activity does that. All three systems posit right and wrong activity and their results as well-being and suffering respectively. Dharma is thus the law of being as form. Morality is part of man's nature. It may therefore be said that the substance of the Brahmanic concept is held by all. Dharma as a technical term is not here included amongst the common concepts, because its sense varies in Buddhism, in which it has its own peculiar meaning. Whilst in Jainism the word means something wholly different from what it does in any other system. Each of the common concepts must be interpreted in the case of any particular Indian faith in terms of its own peculiar tenets as regards these concepts and other matters such as the reality and dissolution of the universe, karma and liberation. Thus, the latter is defined differently in Buddhism, Jainism and in the various Brahmanical schools. According to all systems, liberation is described as the release from the bondage of birth and death, limitation and suffering. In some systems it is not positively said to be joy, but is described as pure painless state of that which, in association with mind and matter, manifests as the empirical self. The Jainas regard it as a state of happiness. Some Buddhist descriptions are to the same effect, but in general Buddhism deprecates the discussion of so inconceivable a state. The Vedanta, on the other hand, positively describes it to be unalloyed and unending joy, so that the nature of such joy, whether as arising through the identification of the individual self with the Supreme Self or in association therewith, is variously affirmed by the non-dualist, qualified non-dualist and dualist Brahmanic schools. Brahmanism adds to these concepts of the cycle, samsara, right and wrong action, dharma, adharma, causality, karma, and liberation, moksha, that of the Atman. All recognized Brahmanic systems affirm the Atman, though they differ on the question of its nature as also whether it is one or many. It is on this question whether there is or is not an Atman that the Brahmanic and Buddhistic schools are in dispute. The point at issue as formulated from the standpoint of Vedanta may be shortly stated to be as follows. Everyone admits the existence of a psychophysical flux either as the individual or the universe of his experience. Indeed, one of the Sanskrit names of the world is Jagat, which means, the moving thing. For the universe is in constant activity. At every moment there is molar or molecular change. As an object of sensible perception the universe is transitory, though some things endure longer or shorter than others. The question is, then, whether, beside psychophysical transience, there is a spiritual enduring essence of the universe and of man, which manifests in the latter as the empirical self whereby it knows itself as permanent amidst all its changeful experiences. The Buddhists are reputed to have held that there is nothing but the flow. Man is only a continually changing psychophysical complex without a static center, a series of momentary mental and bodily states, necessarily generated one from the other in continuous transformation. In this flux there is no principle of permanence on which, as on a thread, the worlds as beads are strung. Man may have the notion that he is a self, but this does not, it is said, prove that there is an Atman as substratum of such empirical self. To this Vedanta asks, if so, who is it that is born and reincarnates? It then answers its question by saying that the embodied self is born and dies, but that the Atman as such is not a self and is neither born nor does it die. Birth and death are attributed to it when it appears in connection with psychophysical bodies. It is the embodied Atman which is born and dies. The Atman as it is in its own bodiless nature is unborn and eternal. Change and changelessness are terms of logical, that is dualistic thinking, and have no meaning except in relation to one another. All activity implies a static condition relative to which it is active. There can be no universe except by the combination of the active and non-active. Without activity the universe does not become. Without some principle of stability it cannot exist even for a moment as an object of the senses. The illogical Atman as such eternally endures. The universe as the psychophysical is the product of the Atman as power. As such product, it is transient. It presents, however, the appearance of relative or limited stability because of the immanence of the Atman. The Atman manifests as the relatively stable and empirical self, and that which manifests as such self is also the Brahman as essence of the universe which is the object of such self. For Atman and Brahman are one and the same. According to the second standard, Atman is the seat of consciousness. In the Vedanta, however, Atman is consciousness itself. Whatever may have been its origin, as to which nothing is of a certainty known, Mother Goddess worship is as old as the world. Śākta doctrine is now a form of Vedanta which may be called Shakti Veda or Śākta Vedanta. Kuṇḍalinī Tantra speaks of that monism of which Shiva speaks, Advaitanta Shivanaktam, 1, 108. See also Mahānirvāna Tantra, Chapter 2, 33-34, 3, 33-35, 50-64, Prapañcasara Tantra, 2, 19, 6, Advaitapavapanasad. For the identity of Jivatma and Paramatma in liberation, Mukti, which the Vedanta defines to be Jivabrahmano Hakyam, see Mahānirvāna Tantra, 8, 264, 265, v. 105. See also Prapañcasara Tantra, 2, where Rim is identified with Kundalini and Hamsa, and then with Soham. See also IB, Chapter 24, that, which is subtle I am, Ya Suksma Soham, and Jnanarnava Tantra, XXI, 10. As to Brahmasmi, see Kuṇḍalinī Tantra, 9, 32, and IB, 41, Soham Bhavina Pujayat. The Śakta disciple, Sadhaka, should not be a dualist, Maharudryamala, I Khanda, chapter 15, 2 Khanda, chapter 2. Similarly, the Gandharva Tantra chapter 2, says that he must be devoid of dualism, Vidahina, see Pranatashini, 108, in fact, that particular form of worship which has earned the Kaula Tantras. Their ill name is practical application of Advaitavada. Kalakara is said to properly follow a full knowledge of Vedantic doctrine. As the Satkakrana see the serpent power, says, the Jivatma or embodied spirit is the same as the Paramatma or supreme spirit, and knowledge of this is the root of all wisdom, Mulavidya. Shakta Vedanta teaches its doctrine from the practical standpoint which Mayaveda calls Vyavaharika. It lays stress on the concept of power. Atman is not mere being only. Even in the dissolution of the world, being is power, though power or Shakti is then consciousness as such, Sidrapini. Atman manifests as the universe by and out of its power. Atman and power are never separated, and so it is said, that there is no Shiva without Shakti or Shakti without Shiva. Shiva without power is but a corpse. Both Shiva and Shakti are of the same nature since they are both being consciousness, bliss. But power manifests as the becoming or psychophysical universe. Power is both power to be, to self-conserve, and resist change, as well as power to become the universe and as material cause of the universe itself. Power to be is the static aspect of Shiva Shakti. Power to become is the changeful aspect of Shiva Shakti. In Mayaveda the world is said to be produced by the power of the Lord or Ishvara. But whilst Ishvara is Brahman or Godhead as conceived by the psychophysical experiencer, Brahman on the other hand is not Ishvara. The former is beyond, in the sense of exclusive of, all relations with the universe, and so, though wrongly, some people call Ishvara unreal, and the universe created by him an illusion. According to Shaktivada, not only is Ishvara Brahman, but Brahman is Ishvara, and no question of the reality of either Ishvara or the world arises. We may, however, say at once that Godhead is real, God is real and the universe is real. The use of the term illusion only tends to mislead even in Mayaveda. According to the concise definition of Kamalakanta, a celebrated sadhaka, Maya is the form of the formless, Shunyasya Akara Iti Maya. The world is the Divine Mother in form. As she is in herself, she is formless. Discussion on the subject of the reality of the world is often vain and tedious, because the word real has several meanings, and that in which it is used is not stated. The terms absolute and transcendental should also be clearly defined. The distinction between Mayaveda and Shaktivada hangs on these definitions. Both absolute and transcendental mean beyond relation. But the term beyond may be used in two senses, a, exceeding or wider than relation, b, having no relation at all. The first does not deny or exclude relation but says that the absolute, though involving all relations within itself, is not their sum total, is not exhausted by them, has been transcending them. The latter denies every trace of relation to the absolute, and says that the absolute must have no intrinsic or extrinsic relation, that relation, therefore, has no place in the being of the absolute. Shaktiveda adopts the first view, Mayaveda the second. From the first point of view, the absolute is relationless being as well as manifestation as an infinity of relations. This is the true and complete illogical whole. Inasmuch as the absolute exceeds all relation and thought, we cannot say that it is the cause, that it is the root of creation, and so forth, but inasmuch also as it does involve relation and thought, we can say that it is the first cause. That there has been a real creation, and so forth. The Mayaveda view by negating all relation from the reality of Brahman negates from its transcendent standpoint the reality of causation, creation and so forth. Beyond may, therefore, mean, 1, exceeding, fuller than, not exhausted by, or, 2, excluding, negating, expunging. In Shaktiveda, the supreme reality is fuller than any definition, limitation, which may be proposed. It is even beyond duality and non-duality. It is thus the experience whole, the illogical. The Mayaveda pure Brahman is an aspect of it, but it is not the whole, Purna. The expression, wider than relation, may be thus illustrated: I am related in one way to my wife, in another way to my children, in yet another way to my brothers, friends, and so on. I am not fully expressed by any one of these relations, nor even by their aggregate, for, as a member of an infinite stress system, I bear an infinity of relations. Pragmatically, most of these are ignored, and it is thought that I am expressed by a certain set of relations which distinguish me from another person who has his own set. But Brahman as absolute can have no such set. It is expressed, but not fully expressed, even by the infinite set of relations which the cosmos is, because relations, finite or infinite, imply a logical, and therefore segmenting and defining thought. But Brahman as absolute equals experience whole equals the illogical. Since Brahman equals experience whole equals CIT as power to be and become, it is nothing like the unknown and unknowable being, thing in itself, of Western skeptics and agnostics. In all Indian systems, the world is real, in the sense that it has objective existence for, and is not a projection of, the individual mind. In all such systems, mind and matter coexist, and this is so even in that form of Ekajiva Veda which holds that Brahman by its own veiling and limiting power makes one primary self of itself. And that all other selves are but reflexes of the primary self, having as reflexes no existence apart from that of the primary one. The world of matter is not a projection of an individual mind, but its reality is coordinate with that of the individual mind, both being derived from the self-veiling and self-limiting operation of Brahman appearing as the one jiva or primary self. Brahman, in appearing as primary self, also appears as its logical correlate or pole, the not-self, and this not-self is the root matter on which the primary self is reflected as multiple selves and their varied relations. Matter, in this fundamental sense, is not therefore the product of the first or primary individual, self. It is with self the co-effect, logically speaking, of a common fundamental activity which is the veiling and limiting action of the Supreme Being. The version commonly given of Ekajiva Veda, namely that the one primary self is me, and that you, he, and the rest, and the world of objects are the projection of me, is loose and unpsychological. In the first place, me cannot be there, logically conceiving, without its correlate or pole, the not-me, so that, by the very act by which me is evolved from Brahman, its correlate is also evolved, and this correlate is root matter. In the second place, projection, reflection and so forth presuppose not only the projecting or reflecting being, that which projects or reflects, but also something on which the projection or reflection is cast. Projection out of nothing and projection into nothing will give us only nothing. Where then there is matter there is mind. Where there is no matter there is no mind. One is meaningless without the other. Each is every whit as real as the other. But there is no Indian system which is realist in the sense, that it holds that matter exists when there is no mind to perceive it. Such a state is inconceivable. He who alleges it, himself supplies the perceiving mind. In the first standard, mind and the so-called atoms of matter are separate, distinct and independent reals. Matter does not derive from mind or the latter from the former. In the second standard, both matter and mind are equally real, but derive from a common source, the psychophysical potential which as such is neither. Psychic here means mind as distinct from consciousness in the sense of CIT. This psychophysical potential is a real, independent of consciousness which is the other real. In the third standard as non-dual Vedanta the position is the same, except that the psychophysical potential is not an independent real but is the power of the one supreme real as God. The world is then real in the sense that it has true objective reality for the individual experiencers for the duration of their experience of it. No one denies this. The next question is the problem of monism. If ultimate reality be one, how can it be the cause of and become the universe? It is said that reality is of dual aspect, namely, as it is in relation to the world as Ishvara, the Lord or God, and as it is in itself beyond such relation which we may call Brahman. According to Mayaveda, Ishvara is Brahman, for Ishvara is Brahman as seen through the veil of Maya, that is, by the psychophysical experiencer. But Brahman is not Ishvara because Brahman is the absolute illogical real, that is, reality not as conceived by mind but as it is in itself beyond all relation. The notion of God as the Supreme Self is the highest concept imposed on the illogical which, as it is in itself, is not a self either supreme or limited. The Absolute as such is not a cause. There is, transcendentally speaking, no creation, no universe. The Absolute is and nothing happens. It is only pragmatically a cause. There is from this aspect no nexus between Brahman and the world. In the logical order there is. What then is the universe? It is in this connection that it is said by some to be an illusion, which is an inapt term. For to whom is it an illusion? Not to the psychophysical experiencer to whom it is admittedly real. Nor is it illusion for the experience whole. It is only by the importation of the logical notion of a self to whom an object is real or unreal that we can speak of illusion. But there is in this state of liberation no self. More correctly we say that the world is Maya. But what is Maya in Mayaveda? It is not real, for it is neither Brahman nor an independent real. Nor is it unreal, for in the logical order it is real. It is neither Brahman nor different from it as an independent reality. It is unexplainable. For this reason one of the scholastics of this system calls it the doctrine of the inscrutable. In the doctrine of power, Shaktivada, Maya is the divine mother power or Mahamaya. The two aspects of reality as Brahman and Ishvara are accepted. The Lord is real, but that which we call Lord is more than Lord, for the real is not adequately defined in terms only of its relations to the universe. In this sense it is illogical, that is, beyond mind and speech. As the one ultimate reality is both Ishvara and Brahman, in one aspect it is the cause, and in the other it is not. But it is one and the same reality which is both as Shiva, Shakti. As these are real so are their appearance, the universe. For the universe is Shiva Shakti. It is their appearance. When we say it is their appearance we imply that there has been a real becoming issuing from them as power. Reality has two aspects. First as it is in itself, and secondly as it exists as universe. At base the samsara or worlds of birth and death and moksha or liberation are one. For Shiva Shakti are both the experience whole and the part which exists therein as the universe. Reality is a concrete unity in duality and duality in unity. In practice the one is realized in and as the many and the many as the one. So in the Śākta wine ritual, the worshipper conceives himself to be Shiva Shakti as the Divine Mother. It is she who as and in the person of the worshipper, her manifestation, consumes the wine which is again herself, the Savioress in liquid form. It is not only he who as a separate self does so. This principle is applied to all man's functionings and is of cardinal importance from a monistic standpoint notwithstanding its well-known abuse in fact. Real is again used in the sense of eminence. The real is that which is for itself and has a reason for its being in itself. The real as God is the perfect and changeless and the good. The universe is dependent on the ens realissimum, for it proceeds from it and is imperfect as limited and changeful and in a sense it is that which does not endure and in this sense is called unreal. Though, however, the universe comes and goes it does so eternally. The Supreme Cause is eternally creative. The real is then both infinite changeless being as also unbeginning and unending process as the becoming. In this system the real both is and becomes. It yet becomes without derogation from its own changelessness, as it were a fountain of life which pours itself forth incessantly from infinite and inexhaustible source. Both the infinite and the finite are real. Real is again used in the sense of interest and value and of the worthwhile. In this sense, the worshipper prays to be led from unreality to reality, but this does not mean that the world is unreal, but that it is not the supreme worth for him. In whatever sense, then, the term real is used the universe is that. All is real for as the Upanishad says, all this universe is verily Brahman. The scriptural text says, all. It does not say, this, but not, that. The whole is an illogical concrete reality which is unity in duality and duality in unity. The doctrine does not lose hold of either the one or the many, and for this reason the Lord Shiva says in the Kuṇḍalinī Tantra, there are some who seek dualism and some non-dualism, but my doctrine is beyond both. That is, it takes account of and reconciles both dualism and non-dualism. Reality is no mere abstraction of the intellect making jettison of all that is concrete and varied. It is the experience whole whose object is itself as such whole. It is also partial experience within that whole. This union of whole and part is illogical, not unknowable, for their unity is a fact of actual experience just as we have the unity of power to be and power to become, of the conscious and unconscious, of mind and body, of freedom and determination. And other dualities of man's experiencing.